Namaskaram. Today I will continue to answer questions. I will start with a question that was asked in a comment on the video of our previous meeting. Someone wrote, I'll read the whole question first and then answer it little by little. Someone wrote, little confused now. I find looking for ego difficult as I'm not entirely sure what ego actually is. If I asked who am I, then I can see they are just words. And if you reduce that to one word, I, it's just a thought rising up from the same place, chest area, as any other words. And if you say one word at a time, you can see that only one word rises at a time, then dissolves before the next word or thought arises. But what is ego? When you do self-investigation and ask, who am I? Are you holding on to that word I? If you put your attention on that word I, then thoughts temporarily stop. But not long after, thoughts will arise. So I assume that's because you have lost your attention on that word I. But again, how is this investigating ego? Finally, you say I am is ego, and ego creates everything. Now that is confusing. Would love more clarification, because are you saying I am is creating everything, and then and everything we are experiencing? Question mark, thanks. So that is the question. As I say, I'll go through this little, bit by bit to clarify. That is the first sentence. I find looking for ego difficult as I'm not entirely sure what ego actually is. The I that says, I find looking for ego difficult as I am not entirely sure what ego is, that I is ego. Ego is the I that is aware of itself as I am this body, I am this person. So ego is just another term for I, but not I as we actually are, but I as we seem to be when we identify ourselves with a body. As Bhagavan used to say, as Bhagavan clarified, the term I am means I exist. So that refers to our existence. So in other words, our real nature, what we actually are is just I am. But when we rise as ego, we are aware I am, but we are not just aware I am. We are aware of ourselves as I am this body. So the pure I am is our real nature. The same I am when it's mixed and conflated with adjuncts as I am this body, I am this person, I am Michael, or I am whoever. That is ego. So the I that is aware of itself as I am this body, that is ego. Then in the next sentence, this person asks, if I asked who am I, then I can see that they are just words. Firstly, self-investigation doesn't mean asking who am I. Self-investigation means investigating who am I. If, for example, Bhagavan were to give us a book and say, investigate what's written in it, we wouldn't sit there asking ourselves what is written in this book, what is written in this book. We would open the book and see. That is, investigate means to look inside and see. So investigating who am I means looking within ourselves, to see what we actually are. So it's not a matter of asking who am I. Obviously, there's no harm in asking the question, who am I, if that reminds us to turn our attention back towards ourselves. But the mere asking of the question, who am I, is not self-investigation. We need to investigate who am I. And the only means by which we can investigate who am I is by attending to ourselves, by attending to I. So this person says, if I ask who am I, then I can see that they are just words. Yes, but who am I? A word. It's a collection of words. It's a question. It has a meaning, but the words themselves are just words. And if you reduce that to one word I, it's just a thought. Rising up from the same place, chest area, as any other words. Yes, it is true But I in the sense of ego, is just a thought. But though it is just a thought, it is a thought unlike all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are objects. They have no awareness of their own existence, whereas ego, the thought called I, as Bhagavan often referred to it, is the only thought that is aware both of its own existence and of the existence of other things. So the reason why Bhagavan often said that ego is the root thought, the primal thought, the first thought, is that other thoughts here, but first I should clarify, when Bhagavan uses the term thought, he uses it in a very broad sense. Generally, often when people use the word thought, they're thinking what they mean by thought is the verbal chatter that goes on in the mind. Those are thoughts of a kind, but Bhagavan uses thought in a much broader sense. Anything that any mental impression or mental phenomenon is a thought. So in other words, all objects, all phenomena are just thoughts. And ego, the subject who knows all those phenomena, is also a thought. In other words, everything other than our own real nature, our own being, is just a thought. So ego is just a thought, but though it is just a thought, it is different to all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are devoid of awareness, whereas ego is the only thought that is endowed with awareness. So ego is the thought that is aware of all other thoughts. This is why Bhagavan said, ego is the first thought. Only after ego rises do all other thoughts arise. Why? Because all other thoughts exist only in the view of ego. So the answer to the question asked earlier, what ego actually is the I in whose view all other thoughts rise. In other words, the I in whose view all objects or phenomena exist is ego. Because the pure I, that is, I am devoid of adjuncts, is not aware of anything other than itself. It's only when we rise as ego that we become aware of other things. We can see this from our experience in the three states. In waking, we are aware I am. In dream, we're aware I am. And in sleep, we're aware I am. But the difference between waking and dream on the one hand and sleep on the other hand, in waking and dream, we're aware I am, but we are aware of ourselves not just as I am, but I am this person. That I which is aware of itself as I am this person, I am this body, is ego. Because that ego is absent in sleep we are not aware of anything other than our own being, I am. Because ego rises in waking and dream, we become aware of other things. So our awareness of all other things exists only in the view of ourself as ego, as that which is aware of itself as I am this body. So it's only when we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, but we are aware of all other things, all thoughts or forms or phenomena of objects, whatever you want to call it. So ego is just a thought, but it's fundamentally different to all other thoughts. And ego does not rise from a place in the chest, because the chest is a part of the body. The body is one of the objects that exists in the view of ego. So how can ego arise from an object when all objects exist only in the view of ego? What ego arises from is from what we actually are, which is the pure I am. That is what Bhagavan means by the heart. When Bhagavan talks about the heart, he's not talking about a place in the body. He's talking about our real nature, what we actually are, the pure I am. However, because some people who are unable to think beyond the limitations of the body, because some people persisted in asking Bhagavan, you talk about the heart, where in the heart is the body? Is it the Anahata chakra or this chakra or that chakra? Bhagavan said, heart is not physical. Heart is the center of everything. But in terms of the body, A place can be assigned as the heart. That is 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. That is not the actual heart, but that is the heart as it appears in relation to the body. That is, if someone wants to refer to themselves, in all cultures, if we want to refer to ourselves, we point to our chest. We point to 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. Bhagavan used to illustrate this with an example. If you ask the schoolboy who can do the sum correctly, the schoolboy won't point to his head and say, I can do it correctly. He'll point to his chest. Or if you ask him who will run and fetch the post from the post office, he will point to his chest and say, I will run and fetch it. He won't point to his feet and say, I will run and fetch it. Because in relation to the body, though we are aware of the whole body as I, somehow we feel ourselves to be centered in the chest. That is the center. But that's only in relation to the body. But the body comes into existence only after we rise as ego. So the ego cannot rise from the body. Ego can only rise from our real nature. So ego, the thought I, the ego, is not rising from some place in the body. Moreover, the thought I is not just a word. When Bhagavan talks about ego, he's not talking about the word I, he's talking about what the word I refers to. For example, supposing someone says, I have eaten a mango. What do you understand from that? You would understand that you would not take it to mean that they have eaten a word, the word mango. You would understand that they've eaten that which the word mango refers to. In other words, the fruit. Likewise, if Bhagavan tells us to investigate I, he's not asking us to investigate the word I, he's asking us to investigate what that word I refers to, namely ourself. So it's not the word I we are to investigate, it is that which the word I refers to, namely ourself. So, and then this person goes on to say, if you say one word at a time, you can see that only one word rises at a time, then dissolves before the next word or thought arises. But what is ego? Ego is that which is aware of all thoughts and all words, that in whose view thoughts and words exist. And then this person goes on to say, when you do self-investigation and ask, who am I, are you holding on to that word I? No, it's not. We are investigating ourselves. We are not investigating merely the word I, we are investigating that which the word I refers to. So it's not the word I that we have to hold on to, it's ourself, that which the word I refers to, namely ourself. That is what we have to hold on to. If you put your attention on that word I, then thoughts temporarily stop. No, that is not the case, because the word I is itself an object. The word I is not what the word I refers to. Well, what the word I refers to is not an object, but the word I itself is an object. So if you put your attention on the word I, you're putting your attention just on a thought. That word I is just a thought. So that is, thoughts cannot stop by attending to the word I. Thoughts will stop if we attend to that which the word I refers to. If we attend to ourselves, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, our attention is thereby withdrawn from all other things. And since thoughts cannot rise except in our view, if we do not attend to them, they do not rise. So they temporarily stop by our attending to ourselves. And then he or she goes on to say, but not long after, thoughts will arise. So I assume that's because you have lost your attention on that word I. Again, as I said, our aim is not to attend to the word I, but to attend to ourself, which is what the word I refers to. But again, how is this investigating ego? Investigating the word I is not investigating ego, but ego is what the word I refers to. So if we investigate ourself, that which the word I refers to, that is investigating ego. And then they go on to say, finally, you say I am is ego. No, that is not correct. I am is not ego. I am is our being. What does I am mean? I am means I exist. So the term, when Bhagavan uses the term I am, he's referring to our existence. In other words, he's referring to what we actually are. Ego is not just I am. Ego is the false awareness, I am this body, I am this person. So ego is the I am mixed and conflated with adjuncts. That is when we are aware of in sleep, we're aware I am, but we're just aware I am. We're not aware of anything else. In waking and dream, we're aware I am, but we're not just aware I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am this person, I am this body. And consequently, we're aware of other things. So I am is not ego. I am is the reality underlying ego, but ego is the adjunct mixed awareness I. In other words, the awareness, I am this body. That which is aware of itself as I am this body, that is ego. So they said, you say I am is ego, and ego creates everything. Yes, ego creates everything, but it's not I am that creates anything. I am is just pure being. I am doesn't do anything. It is our mere being. But when we rise as ego, everything else comes into existence. So everything else is just a dream. And ego is the dreamer of the dream. So in that sense, ego creates everything, because everything exists only in the view of ego. When we don't rise as ego, nothing else exists. When we rise as ego, all other things seem to exist, because all other things that seem to exist only in the view of ego. Without ego, nothing else exists. Bhagavan makes this clear in verse 26 of Uludunaptu, in which he says, Ahandayundayan anatumundahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. There, what he means by everything is all objects or phenomena. Everything other than ourselves comes into existence only when we rise as ego, because all other things exist only in the view of ego. Then he goes on to say, if ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Because since everything exists only in the view of ego, in the absence of ego, nothing else exists. All that exists in the absence of ego is our being, the pure I am. And then they say, now that is confusing, would love more clarification. Because are you saying I am is creating everything then? And everything we are experiencing? That is, everything we are experiencing is experienced by whom? It's experienced by I, but not by the pure I am, but only by ego, that which is aware of itself as I am this body. In sleep, we are not aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently, we're not aware of anything else. All we are aware of in sleep is I am. But in waking and dream, we are aware of ourselves as I am, but not just I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body. Because we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we're consequently aware of other things. So it's only when we rise as ego and are consequently aware of ourselves as I am this body, but everything else seems to exist. When we don't rise as ego, nothing else seems to exist. So as Bhagavan said, what we now take to be the waking state is actually just another dream. A dream exists only in the view of the dreamer. The dreamer is ego. That doesn't mean that this person we take ourselves to be, Michael, for example, just taking this person, called Michael as an example, Michael is not the creator of this dream, because Michael is a part of the dream. The creator of the dream is the I that is aware of itself as I am Michael or I am whoever, whatever. I mean, but whoever you mistake yourself to be, whichever person you take yourself to be, it is not that person that is created the dream. That person is a part of the dream. What has created the dream is ego, that which is aware of itself as I am this person. Because the whole dream exists only in the view of that I that is aware of itself as I am this person. That I is ego. That is the dreamer. So there's no dream without a dreamer. But the dream exists only in the view of the dreamer. So the dreamer is the creator. The dreamer is ego. When we don't rise as ego, there's no dream, and just all that remains in the absence of ego is pure being. As soon as we rise as ego, we begin to dream, and everything we experience is a part of that dream. So to summarize, what ego actually is the I that is aware of itself as I am this body. That doesn't mean that there are two separate I's. I is always only one. I, in its pure condition, without adjuncts, is what we actually are. That's our real nature. I mixed and conflated with adjuncts as I am this body, I am this person, that is ego. And it's only in the view of that I, that is ego, that all other things seem to exist. So I hope this helps to clarify this. If anyone has any further questions, any questions on this subject or any other subject, would you like to ask now? Shalini, are there any questions?
There's nothing in the chat box for the first time.
I could
if
answer
there's
another
anybody who
question, which
sent
is
me
a little bit related to this.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
Okay. In another comment, but on an earlier video, a video from the meeting we had, the second meeting we had back in February, someone wrote, please answer my questions. 1, does self-inquiry method require opening of chakras and escaping through Sahasrara, like other yoga technique teaches? Is opening of Kundalini chakra mandatory? I'll answer this one first and then the second set of questions. No, it has nothing, self-investigation has nothing to do with chakras, nothing to do with opening of chakras or escaping through the Sahasrara or any such ideas. These are all yoga ideas. Self-investigation is quite different to yoga. Yoga is based on a different philosophy, a different way of, yoga is a dualistic philosophy. In the view of yoga, there are two things, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the subject, Prakriti is all the objects. And they believe that, that Prakriti remains unmanifest when it is separate from Prakriti, from Purusha. When Purusha and Prakriti join together, then Prakriti becomes manifest, and then they have their complex philosophy of how so many different tattvas, one proceeds from another, and so on and so forth. It's a very complex dualistic philosophy, but they take both Purusha and Prakriti to be real. That is both subject, the Purusha, and the objects, all objects, in other words, Prakriti, they take to be real. From the perspective of Advaita, we also make that distinction between subject and object. That's a very fundamental distinction to make. But in Advaita, the objects do not exist independent of the subject. The objects exist only in the view of the subject. The subject is ego, and all phenomena are objects. So all these chakras and nadis and Sahasrara and body, all these things, these are all objects. This body is an object known by us. If we are aware of some kundalini waking up or some chakras opening, these are all experiences of objects, of phenomena, things other than ourselves. Self-investigation, that is going outwards, that's going away from ourselves towards other things. Self-investigation is going in the opposite direction. We are not concerned about any phenomena. We are not concerned about the body, about the world, about kundalini or chakras or any such things. To whom do all these things appear? In whose view do all these things seem to exist? In whose view do all these things seem to exist? Only in the view of I. So what is that I? I is what is fundamental. So if we're investigating I, we need not be concerned about kundalini or chakras or nadis or any phenomena of any kind whatsoever. We are investigating that to which all these things appear. So this is a completely different path. Yoga is going outwards to experience things, experience all sorts of wonderful phenomena. I mean, if you practice the techniques of yoga, you may experience all these things, kundalini rising up or whatever. But all these are just objects. They are not our concern. If we want to know who am I, we need to forget about all these objects and investigate ourselves, the subject, the one to whom all these other things appear. That was the first question that person asked. And then they asked a second question, too. I read in a book where Maharshi says that when we meditate I, it leads to the heart on the physical body. He also says heart is the source of all thoughts, and we have to focus on the source of the thoughts. Means we have to focus on the heart, question mark, physical heart place while doing self-inquiry, question mark. No. Firstly, Bhagavan didn't say, but if we meditate I, it leads to the heart on the physical body. This is a reference to the the fifth paragraph of Nana, who am I? What Bhagavan says in the fifth paragraph, whatever it is that rises in this body as I, that alone is mind. What he means by whatever it is that rises in this body as I, whenever we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as I am this body. So as ego, we always seem to be limited within the confines of this body. That's why he says, what rises in this body as I, that means that which rises as I am this body, that alone is the mind. If one investigates in what place the thought called I first appears in the body, one will come to know that it is in the heart. When he says, if one investigates in what place the thought I first appears in the body, he's not meaning that we are to investigate looking for a place in the body. That is, as soon as we rise as ego, we seem to be confined within the body. So, and when he says in what place, he's using the word place metaphorically. So from what do we arise? From what does this thought called I, in other words, ego, from what does it arise? It obviously doesn't arise from the body, because the body seems to exist only when we rise as ego. So the body is secondary to ego. So the body or any place in the body cannot be the source from which ego rises. What exists in the absence of ego? As Bhagavan says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. By everything there, he means all objects or phenomena. So the body is an object. So it depends for its semi-existence upon ego in whose view it exists. So in the absence of ego, everything else is absent. So what remains in the absence of ego? only ourself, only our pure being. We can see this from our own experience. In waking a dream, we rise as ego, and consequently we're aware of other things. In sleep, we do not rise as ego, and consequently we're aware of nothing other than our own being, I am. So from where does this thought called I appear? It appears only from the fundamental awareness I am, in other words, our own being. So when he says one will come to know that it is the heart, what he means by the heart is ourself. What we actually are is the heart. Our own being, our self as we actually are, that is what Bhagavan means by the heart. And then he says, that alone is the birthplace of the mind. Birthplace, the term he used in Tamil is Pirapidam. Pirapidam literally means birthplace. That implies the source of the mind. The mind or ego, mind here he's using as a synonym for ego. So the place from which the mind or ego arises has to be that which exists even in the absence of mind or ego. The only thing that exists in the absence of mind or ego is our own being. So that is the heart. That is what Bhagavan means by the heart. The reason he sometimes talked about a place in the body for the heart was only for those who lacked subtle understanding, who were not capable of thinking beyond the limitations of the body. When such people ask Bhagavan, you talk about the heart, what is the place for heart in the body? But he would sometimes refer to the place 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest, as I explained earlier. But that is not the real heart. What Bhagavan actually means by heart is not any place in the body. It is ourself, our own reality. So heart is another name for Atma-swarupa, our own real nature, for Brahman. Brahman is the heart. In other words, what we actually are, that is the heart. And that alone is the birthplace of the mind, as he says here. Then in the next sentence, he says, even if one continues thinking, I, it will take and leave one in that place. In that place means not a place in the body, but the heart in the true sense of the heart, our own being. What does he mean by this? That is, if we go on thinking I, supposing you think anything, supposing you think of a name of God, supposing you think of Ramana. When you're thinking of Ramana, are you just thinking of the name Ramana, or are you thinking of that which the name Ramana refers to? In other words, Bhagavan. Obviously, when we think of Ramana, we're not just thinking about the word, we're thinking of who that word Ramana is, the name of whom? It's the name of Bhagavan. So when we think of when we think Ramana, we are trying to fix our attention on that which the word Ramana refers to. In other words, Bhagavan. We are not just we're not just trying to think of the word Ramana. We're trying to think of what the word Ramana refers to. Supposing Bhagavan tells you, think of a mango. Is he asking you to think of the word mango, or is he asking you to think of what the word mango refers to? Obviously, he's asking you to think of what the word mango refers to. So if you go on thinking I, the word I refers to something. What does it refer to? It refers to yourself. So by thinking I, it helps us to draw our attention back to ourselves. This is a very useful clue Bhagavan gives us, because in the early stages of the practice of self-investigation, many people find it difficult to understand what it is they are to attend to, because we are so used to attending to objects. When we're asked to attend to the subject, it seems something very abstract for many people. But if they're asked to go on thinking I, and thinking I means not just thinking of the word I, but thinking of what the word I refers to, that will help them to turn their attention back towards themselves. And once they become familiar with self-investigation, with being self-attentive, that will have served its purpose. So by thinking I, it draws our attention back to ourselves. And by attending to ourselves, that will lead us to the heart. The heart is what we actually are. So what the word I ultimately refers to is only the heart. So by thinking of I, it will lead us back to the heart. The heart means ourself as we actually are. So Bhagavan didn't mean that by thinking I, it will lead to some place in the body. He meant it will lead us back to our own being, which is the real heart. And this person says, he also says heart is the source of all thoughts. Yes, because the heart, in the true sense of the heart, that is heart in the sense of our own being, that is the source from which ego rises. And all other thoughts arise from ego, because it's only in the view of ego, but all other thoughts arise. So the ultimate source of all thoughts, the immediate source of ego is the heart. The immediate source of other thoughts is ego, but the ultimate source of other thoughts is the heart, because ego rises from the heart, and from the ego rise all other thoughts. So if you trace all thoughts back to their source, you go back to ego, the one from which all the other thoughts arise, and that takes you back to the heart, which is our own reality. And then the person goes on to say, we have to focus on the thoughts of the heart, means we have to concentrate on the heart, physical heart place, while doing self-inquiry. No, we don't have, the body is an object. The place that is sometimes referred, the place in the body that is sometimes referred to as the heart, namely 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest, that is not the real heart, that is an object. So we are not to focus on any object. We have to focus on the real heart, which is the fundamental awareness I am. In talks, there's a passage. I'll see if I can find it, just to give me a moment. In talks, there's a passage. Someone asked, this is in section 273 of talks. Dr. Syed is asking a series of questions. So it's probably Dr. Syed who asked this question. He asked, should I meditate on the right side of the chest in order to meditate on the heart? And Bhagavan's answer is very clear. The heart is not physical. Meditation should not be on the right or on the left. Meditation should be on the self. On the self means you should meditate on yourself. Everyone knows I am. Who is this I? It will be neither within nor without, neither on the right nor the left. I am, that is all. And then he goes on to say, the heart is the center from which everything springs. Because you see the world, body, and so on, it is said that there is a center for these, which is called the heart. When you're in the heart is known to be neither the center nor the circumference. There is nothing else. Whose center could it be? So Bhagavan is very, very clear there. We should not meditate on any place in the body. We should not meditate on the right or on the left. We should meditate on ourself alone. We should meditate only on I am, on nothing else. So I hope this adequately answers that question. Shalini, have any other questions come in the meanwhile?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions.
Right.
But just before we get to them, and they're very good questions, I think. I just had a quick sort of thought. When we talk about these various experiences that arise of heat or light or what's called chakras and so on, it's just I just want to point out that that it's true that these are specific parts in the yogic tradition or tantric tradition or whatever, and that's a different part. I mean, it's just one of the many parts. But it also happens very often with people that in the course of self-investigation or just sitting down in meditation, a lot of these experiences simply are natural experiences which arise on the path for many people. And it's simply that one need not pay attention to them or get absorbed in them. I think that is what is always said.
Yes.
Not get carried away, because they are simply objects. They are subtler objects, the Vishaya vasanas and so on. But they may well arise. I mean, all sorts of visions come, and people even see things on the right side of the chest they have a feeling, or I believe that Bhagavan himself had a feeling of heat and so on, whatever, a little bit. It doesn't matter, but it's simply that these are simply part of the, if you like, the natural process which may arise on the way to investigate.
Yes. When we are trying to attend to ourselves, our Vishaya vasanas will draw our attention away towards so many other things. So many different types of experiences may arise. But Bhagavan says, what's it matter however many experiences arise? To whom do they rise? In other words, we need to turn our attention away from the experience back towards ourselves, the experiencer, the one to whom the experiences occurs. So even if we see God in name and form, or we see all sorts of wonderful divine visions, or hear divine sounds, or whatever it may be, we see light in the body or chakras or whatever it may be, these are all things that have appeared. Whatever appears will disappear, so it is not real. What is real is only what is ever present, ever shining, ever existent. That is I am. So it is I. That's why Bhagavan said meditation should only be on I am. It should not be on anything else, because all other things appear and disappear. This body appears and disappears. So why should we meditate on the body? These chakras and kundalinis and all these things, these may well appear and disappear. So what? They are, the very fact that they appear and disappear means they are not real. What is real is what is ever shining. The only thing that is ever shining is I am. In waking, we're aware I am. In dream, we're aware I am. In sleep, we're aware I am. In waking and dream, along with I am, we're aware of so many other things. In sleep, we're aware just I am. We're not aware of anything other than I am. So I am alone is what is permanent. It alone is what is unchanging. It alone is, as Bhagavan said, it is self-shining. It shines by its own light. So that alone is what is real. That alone is what actually exists. That is what we are to investigate.
I'll read out some of the questions.
Yes.
How important is understanding the subtleties of the teachings of philosophy? It looks like it is just a different view on the same subject, where every school has its own concepts or explanations. It is as if looking at an arm and trying to make sense by dividing it into smaller parts like palm, fingers, elbows, nails, and explaining its functions and where they start and where they end. And if in medicine there is a common acceptance of the parts and functions, in religion, spirituality, philosophy, and so on, it's a lot of quarrel about concepts, where God ends, where soul begins, at what extent are things under the control of the God's script, and how much free will we have. What is the end of knowing all this, and how important it is to understand all this. Thank you.
Okay. There is a huge amount of philosophy in this world. Philosophy, it is endless. Philosophers have written about every subject under the sun, and every philosopher has their own opinion. So philosophy is a great jungle, a great ocean. So obviously, we need to select out of all this vast ocean of philosophy what is useful for us. So Bhagavan has taught us a philosophy, but Bhagavan doesn't teach philosophy just for the sake of philosophy. That is, why are we born in this world? We're not born just to philosophize. Philosophy is useful as a means. It's not an end in itself. So Bhagavan, the philosophy that Bhagavan has taught us is the philosophy that is most conducive to our following this path. So all that Bhagavan has taught us, there's a practical implication in whatever Bhagavan has taught us. So we would be well advised to pay close attention to the philosophy that Bhagavan has taught us, to understanding the reasons why he taught us these, the reason for his philosophy and the reasons why, not to engage in discussions with others who may not agree with our point of view. That's useless. The reason we try to understand Bhagavan's philosophy is that if we view things from the perspective of his philosophy, his teachings, that will be most conducive, that will be most favorable to us in following this path. Because all of Bhagavan's teachings have, though some of them may superficially seem to be philosophical, they are philosophical indeed, but they all have practical import. So whatever Bhagavan has taught us, it has a practical implication. And so we need to understand not just what Bhagavan has taught us, but why he has taught us, what he has taught us, what is the practical implication of everything, of each thing that he's taught us, and how it is beneficial for us to accept that particular view. Yes, philosophy. In India, the word for philosophy, that is, in the West we have this word philosophy, but means love of wisdom. But in India, philosophy is called darshana. Darshana means a view. Darshana also means seeing. So very different ways of seeing things, but which way of seeing things is most conducive to us if we want to follow this spiritual path? If our aim is to know ourselves, how should we view things? That is what Bhagavan teaches us. So the Ramana Darshanam, the philosophy of Bhagavan, is the philosophy that will be most conducive, most beneficial for us in order to follow this path. So we shouldn't dismiss any of Bhagavan's teachings, just say, oh, that's all philosophy, I don't need that. There's so many philosophers in this world. We should try to understand why Bhagavan taught what he taught, how this is a practical, what is the practical implication of all that he taught? The practical implication of everything he taught, if we understand it correctly, is that we should turn our attention back towards ourselves and know what we actually are. But in order to turn our attention back to ourselves and know what we actually are, we first need to understand the basic principles. If we don't understand what is meant by ourself, supposing I take myself to be this body, and someone tells me to investigate myself, am I to go and study books on anatomy and physiology? Or am I to look at myself in a mirror or dissect myself? No, that is obviously not, this body is not I. The life that animates this body, the prana, is not I. The mind, the thoughts, feelings, memories, perceptions, and so on, these are not I. These are all objects. The intellect and its functions, these are not I. These are things that are known by us, so they're objects. The Anandamaya kosha, the will, the chittam, which consists of, in its subtlest form, it consists of vasanas, of seeds, but inclinations to know other things. These are not I. These are things that we experience. So I am something different. I am not any object. I am initially we have to be told that we have a subject, that which knows all the objects. But if we begin to investigate the subject means the ego, the knower of everything else. Ego will subside, and what then remains, the underlying reality, is our own being. That is what we actually are. So whatever Bhagavan has taught us, it all is leading us back to this point of turning our attention back within. So we shouldn't dismiss any of Bhagavan's teachings as, oh, this is mere philosophy, I don't need this. If we pay close attention to what Bhagavan has taught us, And if we understand it correctly, we will understand how it actually, firstly, motivates us to investigate ourselves and clarifies what investigating ourselves actually is. So philosophy has its uses, but philosophy is useful to the extent to which it induces us to turn our attention back to ourselves, because the reality does not lie outside ourselves. The reality that is everything outside ourselves, everything other than ourselves is an object. All objects exist only in the view of the subject. So to know the truth of all the objects, we have to know the truth of the subject. What is the reality of the subject? That is the pure being I am. That is, I am is not the subject, but it is the reality underlying the subject. It is the source and substance of the subject. So investigating I am, that is what we need to do if we are to know the truth. So Bhagavan's teachings Bhagavan's philosophy is extremely practical if we understand it correctly. That is, there are so many philosophies in this world, so many religions, so many different beliefs. Bhagavan doesn't tell us to criticize other beliefs, because whatever other beliefs are there, they're the beliefs that are appropriate to people at different stages of spiritual development. So there are so many different, within the broad family of religions called Hinduism in the broadest sense, of the dharmic religions. There are so many different philosophies, so many different views, so many different paths. These are all to suit different people at different levels of spiritual development. Likewise with other religions. There are so many other religions in this world. They all suited to different people at different stages of their spiritual development. If we have been drawn to Bhagavan's path, this is the path for us. If we are more inclined to follow some other path, if we're more inclined to follow yoga or some type of Namarupa Upasana, devotion to God as something other than ourselves, or whatever it may be, that's fine. If that's what appeals to us, that is what is appropriate to us at our present state of spiritual development. But if we have been drawn to Bhagavan's teachings, and if Bhagavan's teachings alone appeal to us, this is the path for us to follow. But just because we say this is the path for us, doesn't mean that we are criticizing other paths. Other paths all are appropriate for people at different levels of spiritual development. But for us, this is the path we have to follow. Sorry, Shalini, I interrupted. I just wanted to add that.
Not at all. The next question is, could you please clarify what you mean by the ego being the one that creates the person, that is, the one we appear to be in day-to-day life? Are they not the same thing? If not, what is the fundamental difference?
The person we take ourselves to be is an object. Now I take myself to be Michael. Michael is the name of a body. This body is clearly an object. And within this body, there's a life. That is, there are all these physiological processes, breathing, heartbeat, and everything. This is called prana. These are all objective. They're things that we know as we know them as objects. Likewise with the mind. The mind is all the perceptions, memories, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. These are all called the Manomaya kosha. These are all things experienced by us. They appear and disappear in our view. So they're obviously objects. The subtler than the mind is the intellect. The intellect is that part of the mind which judges, discriminates, discerns the difference between one thing and another. That is the function of the intellect. But that is all known by us. So it's an object known by us. The subtlest of all the five sheaths is the will. The will is what is called chittam, or the anandamaya kosha. That consists of all the vasanas. The vasanas the inclinations, which are the seeds that give rise to likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. So collectively, they're all called the will. That is all our inclinations, our likes, our dislikes, our desires and things. These are things known by us. So we are something distinct from them. So the person is the five she's that we take ourselves to be. But we are that. Ego is that which is aware of itself as I am these five sheaves. I am this body and mind and so on. It's very important to understand the distinction, because otherwise, if we, that is, though ego is aware of itself as I am this person, ego is not this person. If ego were this person, then when this person is born, ego would be born. When this person dies, ego would die. That's obviously absurd. Ego exists whether we whether we are aware of ourselves as I am Michael, or I am Mary, or I am Saraswati, or I'm Shiva, whatever be the name, or that's a name given to the body. So ego is always aware of itself as I am this body, but it is not the body it is aware of. We can understand this clearly by considering dream. Who is the dreamer of a dream? We are, where that is, ego is the dreamer. So long as we are dreaming, we mistake ourselves to be a person in the dream. The person in the dream is obviously a part of the dream. So that person cannot be the dreamer. That person is not the creator of the dream. The person is a creature within the dream. What has created the dream is the I that is aware of itself as I am this person. So there's a clear distinction between ego and the person we take ourselves to be. Bhagavan highlights this distinction in verse 24 of Uludunapadu. He begins by saying, Jada udul nane nadu. The insentient body does not say I. What he means by body is not just the physical body. He means all the five sheaths, because in an earlier verse, in verse 5, he said, Udul panchakosa uru. The body is a form of five sheaths. Adalal, Aindum, Udulendru solil, Atongum. Therefore, all the five are included in the term body. So when Bhagavan talks about body, he's not just talking about the physical form, he's talking about all the five sheaths. So in verse 24, when he says the jada body does not say I, that is, jada means what is not aware, what is insentient. So the body consisting of these five sheaths is insentient, and therefore it does not say I. When he says does not say I, that is a metaphorical way of saying it is not aware of itself as I. Why is it not aware of itself as I? Because it's jada, it's insentient. So the person is jada. Now all these five sheaths are jada. So that is, the person is not aware of itself as I. It is I that is aware of myself as I am this person, but the person is not aware of me. So the body does not say I. And that's the first sentence. The second sentence, he says, Satchit udiyadu. Satchit means Sat is being, Chit is awareness. So Satchit is that pure being, that pure awareness that we actually are. In other words, the awareness I am, which is our own being, that does not rise. When he says it does not rise, why does it not rise? Because it is constant. In waking, we're aware I am. In sleep, we're aware I am. In dream, we're aware I am. And in sleep, we're aware I am. So I am is the one constant. So it neither rises nor subsides. So he starts by talking as if there are two things. On the one hand, there's a body, which is not aware of itself as I. On the other hand, there's Satchit, which does not rise. Of course, the body has no independent existence, but that's not the point he's dealing with there. He deals with that in a later verse. But then he says, in the third sentence, he says, in between, one thing I rises as the extent of a body. When he says in between, the implication is in between the body and Sat Chit. In what sense is it in between? The only connection that is Sat Chit is the fundamental reality. The only connection between that fundamental reality and the appearance of the body is this I that rises. That is the link. So in that sense, it's in between. That is only in the view of the I that rises, but this body seems to exist. So it's in between in the sense that it's the link. It's also in between in another sense. That is, supposing you read a story in a newspaper and you're not quite sure whether this is true or false, because some bits of it seem like they could be true, but other things look very doubtful. So you're not sure whether this story is true or false. So you ask someone, is this a true story or is it false? They may tell you it is neither true nor false. It's somewhere in between. What do they mean by saying it's somewhere in between? It has got elements of truth and elements of fiction. So it's neither entirely true nor entirely false. It's somewhere in between. It's a mixture of fact and fiction. So in the same way, ego, this I that rises in between Sat Chit and the body, it is neither the body because it's aware of itself as I, nor is it Sat Chit because it rises. So it's neither the body nor Sat Chit, but it borrows properties of both. From Sat Chit, it borrows the awareness I. From the body, it borrows its form, and it's aware of itself as I am this body. So ego is neither the body, nor is it Sat Chit. And then he says, in between one thing, I, that one thing, I is ego, rises at the extent of a body. Why does he say rises at the extent of a body? Firstly, it rises, it comes into existence and it ceases to exist. Secondly, when it comes into existence, it is always aware of itself as I am this body. So this ego is seemingly limited to the extent of its body. Where am I? I'm here. I'm not in any other place. I'm only here. So we feel ourselves to be limited within the extent of the body. So in other words, what he's referring to in that third sentence is ego, the false awareness, I am this body. And then he goes on in the fourth sentence to say, this is Chit Jada Granti. Chit Jada Granti means Chit refers to Sat Chit, the pure awareness I am. Jada refers to the body. And Granti means a knot. So it is the knot that results from the entanglement of Chit and Jada. Of course, Chit never actually gets entangled, but as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So I am and this body are tightly bound together by this knot. In that mixed awareness, that conflated awareness, I am this body, I am is Chit. The body is Jada. We are taking these, Chit means awareness, Jada means what is not aware. So these two contrary elements, we take together and we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. This body is insentient, but we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, as if this body, so how can that which is aware be what is not aware? The body is not aware. So there's a fundamental, ego is a fundamental confusion. It is a knot formed by the entanglement of Chit and Jada, of awareness and what is not aware. In other words, it's the false awareness, I am this body. The I am portion is Chit. The body is Jada. The identification of the two as I am this body, that is the knot. And then he says bandham. Bandham means bondage. So because it's a knot, it's binding us. We seem to be bound to this body and hence bound to the world because of this false identification, I am this body. And then he says jivan, it's the jiva, it's the soul. Nupame, it is the subtle body. Here he's using the subtle body in a special sense. No need to, I won't go into that now, but there's a reason why he says that. It's not the usual sense in which the term subtle body is used. Nupame, ahande, ego. This is ego, this chit-chat, this false awareness that rises, I am this body, this is ego. Ichamsara, this samsara, that is the whole of samsara boils down to nothing other than ego, because it's only when we rise as ego, but we seem to be caught up in all this samsara. When we do not rise as ego, there is no samsara. So samsara boils down to ego. This is the root of all our problems. And manam, mind. That is the term mind is used in a different sense in different contexts. But if we take mind in its broadest sense, mind consists of both subject and object. That is, all the other thoughts that constitute the mind are objects, but the I that is aware of all those other thoughts, that is the subject. So what the mind essentially is, as Bhagavan says in verse 18 of Upadesha, what the mind essentially is only this first thought I, in other words, ego. So ego is not the body. The body, meaning the five sheaths, is the person. Ego is not the person, but it always identifies itself as I am this person. In this life, we're aware of ourselves as this person. When this dream comes to an end, the dream comes to an end. So this person comes to an end, but the dreamer, namely ego, remains. So long as ego remains, it'll continue dreaming. So when after the end of the life of Michael or whoever we take ourselves to be, when this life comes to an end, the ego remains and will dream itself to be some other person. Since ego is dreaming itself to be one person in one life and another person in another life, ego and the person are obviously not the same. So it's very, very important to understand the distinction between the person we take ourselves to be and the I that is taking itself to be, I am this person. What we are to investigate is that I, not the person we seem to be, but the I that is aware of itself as I am this person. The more we attend to I, the more the adjuncts will drop off, because the adjuncts are not holding us. We are holding the adjuncts. It's not the body that says, I am such a person. It's we who say I am such and such a person. So it's we who are clinging to this body. So if instead of holding on to this body, if we try to hold on to ourselves, to our own being, the body, all these adjuncts will drop off, and eventually the pure I alone will remain. I hope that is a clear answer to that question.
Thank you, Michael. So the next question was, it's very much part and parcel of the questions which have been answered so far, which is, can you please go into the view that there is only one ego? I'm not sure if...
Yes, I will answer that. In a dream, how many dreamers are there? There is only one dreamer. But one dreamer takes itself to be a person in the dream and sees many other people that are just like it. So when we are dreaming, we take ourselves to be a person and we see so many other people. All those other people seem to be just like us. They seem to be seeing the world just as we are seeing it. So long as we identify ourselves as a person, we see so many other persons, and those other people seem to be egos just like us. But when we wake up from a dream, we recognize that all those persons, but both the person we took ourselves to be and all the other people, all existed only in the view of ourself as the dreamer. So the dreamer is one. The dreamer is ego. There's no such thing as a dream in which there's more than one dreamer. Can only be one dreamer, because the dream exists only in the view of the dreamer. So if there were a second dreamer, that second dreamer would appear in the view of the first dreamer. So there's only one dreamer. So one ego means though Bhagavan doesn't say there's only one person. Obviously, that would be absurd. There are what is it, 7 billion people in human form, and so many people in other forms, in forms of so many other species. They're also people like us. In much of the, I mean, they're in so many ways the jivas that take themselves to be cats or dogs or horses or cows or whatever, they're very much like us. They also take this body as I am this body, and they also suffer the joys and sorrows, and they have likes and dislikes and so on. So we're all people. There are obviously many, many people. But all those people exist in whose view? Only in the view of the dreamer. So the dreamer is one, but people are many. So long as we are dreaming, we take ourselves to be one among those many people. So because we experience ourselves as I am this person is, we are so concerned about the welfare of this person. We want this person to have food, clothing, shelter. We want to have a loving relationship with others. We want people to appreciate us. We want people to show us the same respect that we show them. We have so many likes and dislikes and so on. So long as we take ourselves to be a person, all the other people we seem to be are just as real as the person we take ourselves to be. So if we attach so much importance to the comforts and conveniences of this person, we should be equally concerned about the comforts and conveniences of others. So long as our attention is going outwards, we have to act in this world as if there are many egos. For every person, there is an ego. That is how it seems to us now. But in order to turn within, we need to recognize that all these many people exist in whose view? Only in my view. So who am I to whom all these things appear? So the teaching of ekajiva, one jiva or one ego, is a teaching that is intended to help us to go within. We should not try to misapply it by trying to apply it in action. So long as we're engaged in activity, we seem to be a person, and there are many other people just like us, and those other people are just as important as us. So though this is a type of solipsism, it's a very refined solipsism. There are so many arguments philosophers make against solipsism, but the type of solipsism they're arguing against is are very much cruder forms of solipsism. Bhagavan never says there's only one person. Bhagavan will acknowledge, so long as you rise as ego, you seem to be a person, and so long as you seem to be a person, there seem to be so many other people like you. So Bhagavan doesn't dispute that. So so long as we're looking outwards, as long as we take ourselves to be a person, we have to show the same concern and regard and for other people as we show for the person we take ourselves to be. But in order to go within, we need to be willing to recognize that the person we take ourselves to be and all other people exist only in the view of this ego. So who am I, the one in whose view all these people seem to exist? I hope that is a useful clarification.
I'm again going to sort of bundle some of the questions together,
right,
so that I think it'll be quicker. Seems to be related. Yes, the question is, why can't awareness of ego and that of the self, that is Brahman, coexist in ego's awareness? Also, why is ego considered bad when the journey of self-realization actually starts with ego's awareness?
The journey of self-realization, as you call it, is necessary only because we have risen as ego. So ego is the problem we are dealing with. So it is to get rid of, but ego is a false awareness of ourselves. What we actually are is the pure awareness I am. But now we mistake ourselves to be, I am this person. This person is not what we actually are. So being aware of ourselves as I am this person is a false awareness, of an awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. And because we're aware of ourselves as I am this person, problems are endless. That is the problem of embodied existence. We all know there's so many problems. So the whole purpose of this path is to get rid of ego. Ego is the root cause of all our problems. So to say what is wrong with ego when we need ego to follow this path, that's like saying, I need this problem in order to get rid of this problem. Yes, if we didn't have this problem, we wouldn't need to get rid of it. So yes, there'd be no need for this path. It's because of ego that there's a need for this path. But this path is necessary only to get rid of ego. That was the later part of the question. What was the earlier part of the question?
Yeah, so the entire question is, why can't awareness of ego and that of the self-Brahman coexist in ego's awareness? And also, why is ego considered bad when the journey of self-realization starts with ego's awareness?
Okay. Real awareness is just the awareness I am. Ego is a false awareness. It's an awareness I am this body. And because we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we are consequently aware of other things. So long as we're aware of other things, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. Being aware of ourselves as I am this body is not being aware of ourselves as we actually are, because what we actually are is not this body. It is the fundamental awareness I am. So long as we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we are not aware of ourselves as just I am. When we're aware of ourselves as just I am, when we're aware I am nothing other than I am I alone, nan, or aham, as Bhagavan put it, I am I. When we're aware of ourselves as I am I, we cannot mistake ourselves to be the body. In other words, when we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, we cannot mistake ourselves to be something else. If you see the rope as a rope, you can't mistake it to be a snake. You can mistake it to be a snake only when you're not seeing it as it actually is. So you can't simultaneously see the rope as a rope and as a snake. If you see it as a snake, you are not seeing it as a rope. If you see it as a rope, you're not seeing it as a snake. The two are incompatible. The same thing cannot be both a rope and a snake. So either we see it as it actually is, namely as a rope, or we see it as something other than what it actually is, namely a snake. We can't see both simultaneously. So that's why Bhagavan said, so long as we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, he says in the third paragraph of Nana, he said, so long as as we are aware, so long as there's Jagat Drishti, awareness of the world, Swarupa Darshana cannot arise. Why? Because Swarupa Darshana means awareness, that Swarupa Darshana literally means seeing our real nature. In other words, being aware of ourselves as we actually are. When we're aware of ourselves as we actually are, we are not aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently, we are not aware of the world. We're aware of the world only when we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So long as we're aware of the world, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So the two are incompatible. I hope that adequately answers that question. So we have a choice. Either we can be aware of ourselves as we actually are, in which case we'll be aware of ourselves alone, because nothing other than ourselves actually exists, or we can be aware of ourselves as I am this body, in which case we'll be aware of the seeming existence of so many other things. That is false awareness, because firstly, I am not this body. So being aware of myself as I am this body is a false awareness. And because I'm aware of myself as I am this body, I'm also aware of other things. But those other things don't actually exist. They seem to exist only in the view of myself as ego. So ego is a false awareness. The two defining characteristics of ego, as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently we're aware of the appearance of other things. That is the problem. If we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, we consequently would not be aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently we would not be aware of any other thing. It's as simple as that.
I'm going to just put forward two questions which are related to this topic, and then we'll go on to another topic. It's just that I think people might find this useful. So the question is, if ego is only one, why did it not cease to dream other people, the world, when Ramana Maharshi and other self-realized masters' egos died?
All those self-realized masters, when we say self-realized masters, the fact that we are talking in plural, we are taking those self-realized masters to be people. Those people exist only in the view of ego. That is, the person called Ramana Maharshi exists only in the view of ego. But that is Bhagavan. What Bhagavan actually is not that person. Bhagavan, that is Bhagavan's fundamental teaching is, I am not this body. So in Bhagavan's experience, he doesn't experience himself as a person. It's only in our view that he seems to be a person. What he actually is the pure awareness I am. So ego, there is only one ego. In that view of that one ego, there are so many other, the ego takes itself to be a person, and it consequently is aware of so many other people. Some of those other people it believes to be jnanis. Some of them it believes to be ajnanis. But they all exist only in the view of ego. What Bhagavan actually is doesn't exist only in the view of ego, because what Bhagavan actually is what we actually are, the pure awareness I am. But so long as we talk about self-realized masters as if they are people, those people exist only in the view of ego. Bhagavan used an analogy to illustrate this. That is, the question arises then, okay, then if the person we take to be guru is just a projection, how can that guru wake us up? How can that guru bring about the real awakening? For that, there's an analogy. It's actually used in some old Tamil text, but Bhagavan also referred to this. That is, there's a belief, but elephants are so afraid of tigers, but if an elephant dreams of a tiger, or a tiger or a lion, I can't remember which, lion, I think it is. Elephants are so terrified of lions. If an elephant dreams of a lion, it will immediately wake up. But the lion that the elephant dreams of is unreal. But the awakening it brings about is real. So the name and form of the guru is unreal. But because that what is shining through that unreal name and form is our own reality. So it's pointing us back towards ourselves. That is, how does Guru wake us up? By saying, know yourself, turn within, see what you actually are. Find the real Guru within yourself. So because the Guru in name and form turns us back towards ourselves, towards our own reality, which is the actual Guru, it brings about our awakening. So the lion in the elephant's dream is unreal, but it brings about an awakening which is real. Likewise, the name and form of a guru is unreal, but it brings about the real awakening by turning our attention back towards ourselves. I hope that adequately answers that question.
Yes, I think that was really clear. Thank you, Michael. It just reminded me of something which I first read when I first came across Ramana Maharshi's collected works. I think I was about 23. And it struck me when it said that space and time are within you. And of course, this is the Eka Jiva, or the ego. And when we do not go straight to the ego and come to realize that space and time are within us, we think in terms of space and time, of different individuals, of different gurus across time, and of me and somebody else who's enlightening
Yes.
me and so on, just to, yeah, that was it.
In an earlier version of verse 16 of Uludunapadu, Bhagavan says, if we have a body, time and space will follow us. It will swallow us. But are we the body? If we know ourselves, then we will swallow time and space. By limiting ourselves as a body, we seem to be limited within time and space. But actually, this time and space appears only within us. So if we know ourselves as we actually are, then time and space will cease to exist.
And the questions which arise from thinking of ourselves and others in terms of time
yes, everything will cease to exist. When the questioner ceases, the questions will cease along with it.
So this was the last one to do with anything to do with the ego, and I think we can do this quite quickly. So it's the ego that has these ideas of trying to understand the source or reality, but it never will. For as long as it remains, then the source reality will remain out of its reach. It's only when the ego is no more, then reality can be seen as it is, but there will be no one there to see it. What irony.
Yeah, well, it's not really an irony. Ego is a false awareness of ourselves. When we as ego turn our attention back to see what we actually are, as soon as we see what we actually are, we thereby cease to be ego and remain as we actually are. So ego can never realize itself. Anyone who claims, I am self-realized, I have realized myself, Bhagavan said that is ground for ridicule. Because that I that is aware of itself as I am this person, that I must die, that is self-realization. So the death of ego alone is self-realization. So anyone who says, I am self-realized, it's clearly telling a lie.
The next question, Michael, is we are on this path with sincerity and dedication. However, sometimes the mind is polluted by desires, such as sexual desire. How can we uproot this desire for good? Is it enough if we ask Bhagavan to do this? Or is there some task on us to do?
Bhagavan has given us one task and one task alone, to know what we actually are. So long as we rise as ego, we experience ourselves as I am this body. So long as we experience ourselves as I am this body, we are liable to fall a prey to this sexual desire, because as a general rule, male bodies are attracted to female bodies. Female bodies are attracted to male bodies. That's not always the case, but that's the general rule. But almost all of us experience sexual desire in some form or other. This is a consequence of taking ourselves to be the body. So nobody can claim to have conquered lust, conquered this carnal desire, this sexual desire, so long as they rise as ego. Only the death of ego will bring about the eradication of this desire. It's a very, very, it's a very fundamental desire, but almost, we can say, hardwired into ego, because ego identifies itself with a body, and a body is, that is, animal bodies, we know, they reproduce by sexual means. And naturally, as an animal, we want to reproduce, and it's just the way this embodied existence works. So we cannot be free. We cannot be totally free of sexual desire so long as we rise as ego. Of course, there may be times when that desire seems to wane, seems to go into the background, but we can never be sure that we've conquered it, because as soon as we begin to think that we've conquered it, it will flare up and swallow us. So we just have to live with it. How to deal with sexual desire? There's no simple answer. One way is to try to avoid avoid all sexual contact or anything. But just because we are avoiding the actual act of sex doesn't deal with the root problem, which is the desire for that. So that desire can trouble us, even if we try to maintain celibacy, even if we try to keep our mind off that subject, that those thoughts and desires can rise, and they can rise with great force. So the alternative to celibacy is to be, is that's usually prescribed, is to be in a marriage or a loving relationship with another person. But even that doesn't solve the problem, because this desire is such, the more we try to satisfy it, the stronger it becomes. The more we try to deny it, the stronger it becomes. So there's no easy way out of it. The only thing is we have to recognize this is something we have to live with. But however strong our sexual desire is, there is nobody who is always desiring that. That desire comes and goes. Most of the 20 of our waking life or dream life, we are preoccupied with other thoughts, other concerns. So sex is not the only thought that's dominating our mind. So sometimes that thought may rise very strongly, and we may seem to fall a prey to that desire. But we just need to keep on trying as much as possible to be self-attentive. That's the only way. The only solution to this problem is the practice of self-attentiveness. That doesn't mean that if we practice self-attentiveness, this desire is going to automatically go. No, sometimes while we are practicing, this desire rises up even more strongly. So there's no easy answer to this. I mean, there's no perfect way to deal with this. The only way is to continue following the path that Bhagavan has taught us. Because Bhagavan, to tell you the truth, he's not concerned about these things. These sexual desire and all other desires, these are symptoms. These are the disease is ego. The disease is a false awareness, I am this body. So long as this false awareness, I am this body, is there, the symptoms will definitely be there. There'll be sexual desire, there'll be all sorts of desires. Bhagavan is not interested in trying to deal with the symptoms. He's interested in dealing with the root cause. So if we follow Bhagavan's path, yes, so until ego is annihilated, we have to live with the fact that we have sexual desire. And sometimes it's going to rise very strongly, and we're going to we're going to be carried away by it. I mean, even if we don't physically indulge in that, our mind will be craving for that. That's something we have to live with. That's part of the price of embodied existence. But the ultimate solution to this is to patiently persevere in our practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. Thereby we are dealing with the root of the problem, and when the root is solved, the problem is solved.
I think this is quite an important question, Michael. I'm glad you've answered it at such length, because it's come up. And it's also come up in the last session we had to do with emotions and how we should respond to it. And time and again, there is a tendency in almost all sort of religious traditions of a kind of suppression. And, there is much made of asceticism. But the fact of the matter is that even the greatest of ascetics and so many gurus, they end up having, it doesn't just go away. And so one of the things we're talking about is that it's better, as you were saying, to simply be very practical and factual, that this is how we are, and then think, and then see how to tackle it, because, and not necessarily something bad, it's the natural course of things. So we are reproducing, I mean, we're a species that reproduces.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to happen just as we need to eat and to drink. This is also going to happen. It's part of our natural makeup, biological makeup. But one of the things which I was thinking about when you're saying so astutely and wonderfully what you were saying is that in our day-to-day life, whenever any sorts of strong emotions come up, or sexual urges come up, or whatever it might be, attractions or whatever it might be, whether it's to do with food or to do with work or to do with sexuality, I think it's quite important to be ethical, and that's not necessarily to not harm others, and that doesn't necessarily mean to always obey a social norm, because norms can be sort of useful, but they can also be harmful. We don't know. So I think that the ethic is very important, to not harm anyone as much as we possibly can, with our mind, with our thoughts, which is the same as our feelings, and so on, or with our bodies. We don't harm. And we don't objectify and use other people to serve our ends. I think so. I think these kind of things become important, and also sort of spiritually. And I think that I'm just saying that. I'm sorry, I'm sort of talking so much, but the other thing was that if we can simply, when these things arise, what I've found with any emotion or any thought, when it arises, it's as you've said, and Bhagavan says, if we simply immediately see it as, this is my thought, it's arisen in me, so to speak, and immediately just sort of let go and just sink back into the self, then that thought, that energy kind of expands and it transforms, whether it's anger, whether it's sexuality, and it becomes something quite different. And perhaps this is one of the reasons that when people, have these deep meditative experiences, they're supposed to be very blissful, this thing of anand or bliss and so on. It's the same energy, it's just that it's become more refined and so on. Anyway, that's all I had to say about it. I'm sorry for taking so much time, but
that is when these desires arise in us, we can try to investigate ourselves. To whom is this desire? We can try and turn our attention back towards ourselves. But the problem is, this is the problem with all Vishaya Vasanas. Vishaya Vasanas are our own likings. So why we get carried away by our Vishaya Vasanas, why we allow ourselves to be swayed by our Vishaya Vasanas, because we want to be. So if we get carried away by thoughts of sexual desire, why are we carried away by them? Because we want to be. We have a greater liking to indulge in these thoughts than to attend to ourselves. So all this entire spiritual path is this battle within our will between the sattvasana, the inclination to hold on to our being and to subside back and be as we actually are, and all these Vishaya Vasanas, these inclinations to go outwards, to enjoy this Vishaya or that Vishaya. So ultimately, sexual desire is just another type of, it's just one among so many different types of Vishaya Vasanas. But it happens to be a very strong one for most of us. There are said to be some people who are asexual. They don't have sexual desire. They are very lucky, but I'm sure they have other desires, other problems. So there's no easy way out of this. That is, so long as we rise as ego will give us trouble in one form or other. The other point, what you said about the ethics, that is also important. And that is, whether in matters to do with sexual gratification or whatever it is, our aim should always be, as spiritual aspirant, that is, the guiding moral principle should be ahimsa. We should avoid causing harm to others. So with sexual morality, it's often very, very complex, because people often are trapped in loveless marriages, for example. So there's an arguable justification for them to seek love and care and affection with others. But that can, even if it's the sexual partner is actually a dominating one, someone who's giving so much trouble, we don't only have to consider them. If we have children, for example, we have to consider children. So it's an extremely complex thing. And even if it's two single people who join together, there's always the danger that a child can be born of that. Are they ready to take that responsibility for the child? So there's the ethical considerations are also very important. But as you say, social norms are not always the right guides. I mean, social norms are there for a purpose, but they don't often. I mean, social norms that may be appropriate in one context may not be appropriate in another context. Sometimes by sticking to social norms too rigidly, we can actually be causing great harm. If two people, if someone is caught in a loveless relationship where the other person is exploiting them, but social norm is they should remain married. That, or in many societies, that is the social norm. But that can be doing a great harm to both people, even to the one who is exploiting the other one. It's not good for them to have a victim who's always submitting to them. So this ethical thing is extremely complex. It has to be decided on a case-for-case basis. And often there's a term that's used in many Indian languages, dharma sangadam. Often in life, we find ourselves in a place where what is dharma is not at all clear. That is, if you follow one course of action, you're causing one sort of harm. If you follow the alternative course of action, you're causing another harm. So which is right? Sometimes we have to balance up the which is more harmful. But often these things are not things that can be measured objectively. So ethics is there's no simple answer to these things. But ultimately, Bhagavan, though of course, if we're spiritual aspirants, we should try to act ethically. But that is not the sole aim of our life. Even if we are a great sinner, even if we've done terrible things, Bhagavan says, however great a sinner one may be, instead of lamenting, oh, I'm a sinner, how can I be saved? If one is steadfast in self-attentiveness, one will surely be saved. So ultimately, Bhagavan expects us, I mean, so long as we're engaging in action, we should act ethically. But we need to go beyond action by holding on to our being, by trying to subside back within. Ultimately, that is the only solution.
I'll move on to the next question.
Yes,
Thank you,
yes.
Michael. I think that was very, very, I'm sure that's very helpful to everyone.
Yeah.
The next one is, yes, the question is, would you have any advice for those of us who are constantly around a very high amount of negativity and negative people where we work in our daily lives, on how to not let the constant flow of negativity from these individuals get to us and pull us down?
Again, this is a very, very difficult question, because we all, in the course of our life, we meet people of all types. And yes, a lot of people are very negative in so many different ways. So we have to live with these things. There's no simple answer to what is, I mean, there's no one correct answer to all these things. Ultimately, that is the one thing Bhagavan has asked us to do, is to persevere in this simple practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. So when we find ourselves with negative people, that's an uncomfortable situation to be in. But we couldn't be in that situation if Bhagavan hadn't put us in that situation. So even we have to accept that is, nobody can do us any harm without Bhagavan's consent. So if we seem to be in a situation where people are harming us, we have to accept that also as Bhagavan's will. So again, there's no simple one answer to these things, but we have to, our aim is, by following this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, we are gradually detaching ourselves, not only from the external world, we are detaching ourselves, most importantly, from the person we seem to be. So if as this person we have to undergo all sorts of difficulties, that's just a part of life. The only way to deal with this is to detach ourselves from this person by holding on to our own being, and thereby surrendering ourselves to Bhagavan. So these are difficulties that we all have to face, but ultimately the only solution is turning back within and subsiding into the heart. All troubles rise when we rise as ego. To the extent to which we subside, to that extent it is good. As Bhagavan says in the final paragraph of Nana, he says, Tan erandal sakalamum erum. If oneself arises, everything rises. Tan adanginal sakalum adangum. If oneself subsides, everything subsides. Here oneself obviously means ego or mind. And then he goes on to say, this is a very, very important sentence, but not so easy to translate it into English. Evelo kevlo tandu nadikiromo, avelo kavlo namayundu. That means, to whatever extent sinking low we behave, to that extent there is goodness. That is the nadikiromo means we behave or we conduct ourselves. Literally means we walk. Tandu is an adverbial participle, but means sinking low, subsiding. It also implies being humble. So the more we subside, the basic meaning of this is, to the extent to which we subside, to that extent it is good. So it doesn't matter what sort of life we live, our aim is to subside more and more and more. And to the extent we subside, to that extent there is goodness. And then he ends by saying, Manate adang adiki kondirandal enge irandalum irakalam. If one is continuously restraining or curbing or subduing the mind, wherever one may be, one can be. So if you're constantly turning your attention within and thereby subsiding within, thereby curbing the rising of ego, even if you're surrounded by negative people, you're surrounded by unfavorable circumstances, you can be like that. It all depends on the extent to which we hold on to our being and thereby subside and detach ourselves from the person we take ourselves to be. So this last paragraph, this is a very, very beautiful summary of Bhagavan's teachings. Bhagavan's teachings are all about subsiding, subsiding, subsiding. To the extent to which we subside, to that extent, we will not be affected by whatever surroundings we may be in.
There's a question from Tony Allen. Tony, are you there? I'm not sure what the question is about.
Yeah, sorry, Shalini, I am here,
Okay.
wrestling with technology as usual. Hi, Michael, Tony here. Once again, most of my questions have been answered before I can ask them, and I hope Bhagavan's grace is strong enough for you to carry on with us for a minute. Yeah, apologies if I'm misquoting, but I seem to remember reading something by Swami Vivekananda which said that we have to do our duty, but it's the way we do it, and if we do it for God, then that's probably the best way to do it and not focus on basically what you've just said. The issue of, not the issue, the matter of relating to self-inquiry and to, of course, to Bhagavan, indeed surrendering, I find quite an interesting one. I think generally it's a Western thing. People like structure and textbooks and whether they should meditate for 9 minutes or 11 minutes and so on and so on. But I wondered if you don't mind talking, and again, apologise if I've got this wrong, something I read a while ago of a great enlightened man called Papaji, who people would go to him and say, what do I need to do? And he would say nothing, and he would say nothing, do nothing. And they would ask him about meditation and chanting and saying prayers. And he said, would say, that's doing something. You don't need to do that. which I thought is basically the same version of as what Bhagavan said. I don't know if, and again, apologies if I've got that completely wrong, but he was, I don't think blunt's the right word, but he would say that he was not a guru and nobody's teacher. And that was the kind of advice he would give people.
That's all very well. It's good to do nothing, but can we remain without doing nothing? The only time we are doing nothing is in sleep. In waking and dream, we rise as ego, and it is the nature of ego to be active. So if we're not doing one thing, we'll be doing another thing. Another thing, I believe that, as he's called, or Punja is his real name, another thing he said is call off the search. That is an impractical thing, because the very nature of ego is to be constantly searching for happiness. So if we're not searching for happiness by following the spiritual path, we'll be searching for happiness in other ways. So the very nature of ego is to be constantly searching, because when we rise as ego, we limit ourselves, we separate ourselves from the infinite happiness that we actually are. So ego will always be restless, it will always be seeking, it will always be active. Obviously, by any amount of activity, we're not going to know what we actually are, because what we actually are is about being, not about doing. So no amount of karma can give liberation. As Bhagavan said, karma actually obstructs liberation. Action of any kind obstructs liberation. But Bhagavan also said, though action obstructs liberation, if action is done without desire, that's nishkarmiya karma, and done for the love of God, that will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. It is not the way to liberation, but it will purify the mind. That is, it will weaken our desires and thereby give us the clarity to understand what is the way to liberation. The way to liberation is not doing anything. But how can we remain without doing anything when the very nature of ego is to be constantly doing? In order to do nothing, ego needs to subside. And how will ego subside? The only way for ego to subside ultimately is to cling to self-attentiveness. As Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, ego is a formless phantom. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. It's a phantom because it's got no substance of its own. It borrows its substance from Sat Chit and it borrows its form from a body. But it is neither. It's neither this nor that. And so what Bhagavan says about it is, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikum, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mika ongum, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to be constantly grasping form. And since ego is formless, and whatever form it grasps is something other than itself. So the nature of ego is to be constantly grasping other things. But if ego tries to grasp itself, to know who am I, if it tries to turn its attention away from all forms, back towards itself, the one to whom all forms appear, he says, Kedinal otum pidicum. That literally means if sought, it takes flight. If sought there means if ego investigates itself to know who am I, it will take flight. That is, it'll run away. Why will it run away? Because it rises, stands, and flourishes by grasping form. If instead of grasping form, it tries to grasp itself, it will subside and dissolve back into its source. That's what he means by saying it will run away. So the practical way to do nothing is to do self-investigation, to hold on to self-attentiveness. Being self-attentive is not an action. Attending to anything other than ourselves is an action, because it's a movement of our mind, our attention, away from ourselves towards other things. But attending to ourselves is not an action. It is a cessation of action. Attending to ourselves brings about the subsidence of ego, who is the doer of action. So if we want to remain without doing, we need to cling to ourselves. So the search must go on. But the search is a search for our own reality. In other words, turning back within. And that must go on. Bhagavan says, sada kalamam, it must go on always. So those superficially, what Papaji says may seem to be similar to Bhagavan, there are fundamental differences.
So if we can do our duty for God, and as Shalini says, conduct ourselves properly, that's kind of turning ourselves around in the right direction. That is. But what are the impurities in the mind? The impurities in the mind of a Vishaya vasanas. Vishaya vasanas, Vishayas means objects, phenomena, forms. Anything other than ourselves is a Vishaya. Vasana means inclination. So our inclination to seek happiness in things other than ourselves, those are the Vishaya vasanas. They are what take our mind away from ourselves. So those Vishaya vasanas are the impurities in our mind. So if we are doing actions by mind, speech, or body, that is the actions we do without desire for the love of God. If we do by body, it's called puja, worship. If we do by speech, it's called japa. If we do by mind, it's called dhyana. Bhagavan explains all this in Upadesha. These are in this order efficacious in purifying the mind. That is in reducing the strength of the Vishaya vasanas. Only when the Vishaya vasanas are reduced to a sufficient extent will we get the clarity to recognize that we cannot gain liberation by any amount of action, but only by subsiding. And we can subside only by holding on to ourselves. So we need, as the mind is purified, we gradually come to recognize that the God we are worshipping outside, the God we are worshipping in name and form by puja, japa, and dhyana, meditation, that God is not other than ourself. He's not something other than ourself. He is ourself. He is that which is shining in us as I. So that is the important change. There, our meditation, which was previously on a name or form of God, becomes meditation on the reality of God, namely on I. That is the means to liberation, because when our attention turns back to I, ego subsides. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 8 of Upadesha, after describing about puja, japa, and dhyana, he says, rather than meditating on what is other, in other words, implying meditating on God as something other than ourselves, the meditation on what is not other, with the understanding that he is I, that is best among all. That is the most efficacious way to purify the mind. And then he says in the next verse, verse 9, by the strength of that meditation, that means by the strength of that self-attentiveness, being in the state of being in one's own being, one's true being, which it transcends meditation, transcends mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. That is the supreme devotion. Thank you, Michael.
So all these other practices are good, but they cannot, or in and of themselves, lead to liberation. They can purify the mind and show the way to liberation. In other words, they can give us the clarity to recognize that God cannot be something other than ourselves. If God is something other than ourselves, then he's a limited God. Because everything is God except me. I'm separate from God. So, I mean, if God is infinite, we cannot be separate from him. He's our own reality. So we cannot find him outside ourselves. We can find him only within ourselves.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
There are sort of two sets of questions on two different topics, which we need to sort out. The first one is related to verse 28 of Uladu Narpadu. So the question is, as I practice more and pay more attention to myself, it becomes more evident that awareness is shining, as if it was harder to be overlooked than before. And it seems clear why it's not necessary even to close our eyes to do self-investigation. But Bhagavan also talks about depth in this practice. And he says we have to sink as in water to find something that is found at the bottom. This is in verse 28 of Ulladu.
Yes.
This implies there is a depth to this practice. So on the one hand, awareness becomes more obvious and more easily accessible because it's me, not an object. But on the other hand, that depth means that awareness can even shine clearer than before. Can you say something about this?
Yes, yes. We need to go deep within. The deeper within we go, the more we are separating ourselves from the adjuncts that we now take to be ourselves. And so the more we are immersing ourselves in the clarity of pure awareness. That is why Bhagavan said, if you investigate what it is that shines as I, then a type of sporana will appear. What he means by sporana is a fresh clarity of self-awareness. And he says that fresh clarity will appear as I am I. So long as our attention is going outwards, we are aware of ourselves as I am this person. But the deeper our attention goes within, the more we separate ourselves from this person and recognize that what we actually are is I and I alone. I am I, not I am this body, I am I. So the deeper we go within, the more clearly that awareness of our own being shines, and that alone is our real identity. And as you say, this is what Bhagavan says in verse 28 is, like sinking, wanting to see something that has fallen in water, sinking within, restraining speech and breath by a sharpened mind, it is necessary to know the place where the rising ego rises. The place where the rising ego rises is obviously from ourselves. Ego cannot arise from anything outside ourselves. It only arises from within ourselves. In other words, ego is arising from our being, from I am. Ego is the false awareness, I am this body. It arises from the real awareness, I am. And he says we need to sink within with a kundamati. Kundamati literally means a sharpened or keenly focused mind. Keenly focused mind on what? What are we seeking to know? The place where ego rises. In other words, the place, he's using the word place here metaphorically, obviously. We need to know the source. We need to know the underlying reality of ego from which it rises. So in other words, our own being. So knowing the place from which ego rises means knowing our own being. So the sharpened mind, the focused mind, we must focus our attention on ourselves. And by focusing our attention on ourselves, we thereby automatically restrain the speech and breath. Bhagavan isn't recommending that we first restrain our speech and breath and then go within. That kundamatiya, by a sharpened mind, applies to sinking within, restraining speech and breath, and knowing the place from which I rise. All this is by that keenly focused self-attentiveness. And that is, it is sinking. That is, the more we attend to ourselves, the more we are sinking, the more we are subsiding. Some people translate it as diving, but diving is not such an appropriate word because diving suggests something active you're doing. It is simply, the more we attend to ourselves, the more we subside, the more we sink back within, like sinking in water. And then in the next verse, he says, not saying I by mouth, investigating with an inward sinking mind, where one rises as I, alone is the path of knowledge. This is in Ulladu, he says this. In the extended version of Ulladu, in other words, in the Kali Vemba version, he added before this the words I think he says Tiendu Pinnum Pol Udalum. That means discarding the body as a corpse without saying I by mouth, investigating with an inward sinking mind, where one rises as I, alone is the path of knowledge. That is, we need to turn our attention within so keenly to know ourselves, the reality from which we've risen as I, And by doing so, we separate ourselves from the body. What Bhagavan means by leaving the body as a corpse, when the body dies, when it becomes a corpse, we are completely detached from it. So leaving the body as a corpse means completely separating ourselves from the body. How do we separate ourselves from the body? By keenly investigating our source. In other words, keenly investigating our own being. To the extent to which we hold on to our being, we are thereby letting go of the body. So the body, we are leaving the body as a corpse and we are sinking within. This alone is the path of knowledge. And then he goes on to say, instead, in other words, instead of sinking within to investigating what is the place from which one rises, instead, thinking not this, I am that, is an aid. Not this means that what he implies there is thinking I am not this body, I am that, I am Brahman, it's an aid. But Atma-vichara mama, is it investigation? Is it vichara? No, it is not. Vichara is nothing but turning the mind back within and thereby sinking within, sinking within with our attention keenly focused on our own source, namely our own being, I am. Because I am is both the source and the substance of ego. It is that from which ego rises and that which ego actually is. Just like the rope is the substance of the snake. What the snake actually is just a rope. What ego actually is just I am. But it seems to be something else because it's mixed and conflated with adjuncts. I hope that adequately answers that question.
Hi, Michael. Can I add something to that?
Yeah, yes, certainly.
Namaskaram. Because well, it's that depth that I asked in the question is because, you know, usually I used to think that in order to attend to myself or to ourselves, we have to somehow to manufacture a state in which after 20 or 30 minutes to go deep into yourself, you manage to achieve. Yeah.
Yes.
As opposed to now it's more obvious that self-awareness is here right now, and you don't need to go through a process in order to create something which is not here right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's ever present.
Exactly, it's ever present. So, but that depth.
The more we attend to it, the more we sink into it, the more we immerse ourselves in that clarity.
Yeah, but that depth, we could say that depth is the vairagya, because you as you are detaching yourself from anything else. It's not a depth with a distance, of course. I mean, it's not,
yeah. I mean, no words can adequately describe this. So when Bhagavan talks about sinking within, it's not I mean, those words, we should understand what is meant by those words. We don't have to take it literally, but we've got so much distance. We have to, Bhagavan uses the analogy of the pearl diver in the same context in Nana. The pearl diver knows maybe the pearls are lying at the bottom. They're 10 meters down. So you've got to go those 10 meters down. There's no such measurements in this. But we need to focus our attention more and more on ourselves. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, to that extent we are sinking within.
So it's not that we are, I mean, if we are not mispracticing by attending to any of our 5 sheets, for example, or any other thing, we're not missing the target. We cannot miss the target. I mean, so maybe it's not so obvious. But to us,
so long as our attention is on ourselves, we are going in the right direction. We are, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, to that extent we will sink within. And as we sink within, what are we sinking into? We are sinking into our own being, the pure awareness that we actually are. So we are sinking into clarity. So the deeper we sink, the clearer it will become. Recently, I was talking with someone who claimed, but within a few weeks of reading Nana, he had understood self-investigation perfectly. I said, nobody can say they've understood perfectly. Just because you understand what the practice is, that you understand the basic, you've got a basic grasp of what it is. None of us have understood the practice perfectly until we have completely lost ourselves in that clarity. To the extent to which we go deep in the practice, to that extent we are truly understanding it. But that understanding is not an understanding we can express in words, because it's beyond words. We are losing ourselves in that clarity, which is beyond thoughts and words. So just because you can say, yes, I know self-investigation is just attending to myself, how simple it is, that doesn't mean you've really understood. You may have understood it conceptually, but we have understood it to the extent to which we have truly sunk within, to which we have immersed ourselves in that clarity. So none of us should think that we have understood this until we have completely lost ourselves. And when we've completely lost ourselves, there'll be no one left remaining to say, I've understood it perfectly. So the true understanding, we have understood this to the extent to which we have lost ourselves in that clarity of our own being, I am.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael.
Right.
Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana.
Yes, we'll just move on to some more questions.
Yeah.
It just struck me when we were saying that that instead of thinking of diving, it's more about sinking in.
Yeah.
That it's another way that people sometimes put this, perhaps it's useful for everyone, I'm not sure, is that it's simply sort of relaxing in an alert way. To say that sort of when the mind stops grasping, that we are more relaxed when we're not grasping, when we're not constantly doing and striving. We're more relaxed, the mind is more at ease, it is quiet. For example, when we start going to sleep, the mind lets go, it's more quiet, or when we're resting on a beach, or, you know, whenever. But if we maintain that alertness, that we are still attentive to that sinking in, to that relaxation, then we're attending to something which is not a mental grasping. We're attending to perhaps a bit more to what we are,
Yes.
if that's helpful, I'm not sure.
That alertness is the key, because otherwise, if we are simply relaxing, we can subside into a state like Leia, or even if not completely into Leia, into a state of equanimity, but in which our attention is not keenly focused on ourselves. The key to this practice, that is, Bhagavan says in Nana, what does it matter however many thoughts rise? But what is needed is to cling to self-attentiveness. So if any thought arises, that means our attention has gone away from ourselves. So to whom is this thought? To me. We turn our attention back to ourselves. So holding on to self-attentiveness is absolutely essential. Otherwise, the opposite of self-attentiveness is pramada. And pramada can happen in two ways. It can either result in our being carried away by our vishaya vasanas, or into our subsiding into a layer, or into a state of, if not complete layer, a state of just quiescence of mind. That is, mere quiescence of mind is not self-attentiveness. That is, by attending to ourselves, the mind will subside and become quiet. But there are yoga techniques. In fact, the whole aim of yoga is yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. The whole aim of yoga is to quieten the activity of the mind, to curb the activity of the mind. But the result, if you curb the activity of the mind to the nth degree, you end up in mano laya, not manonasa. Every night when we fall asleep, we go into a state of quiescence. That is, we withdraw our attention from other things, but because we're not attending to ourselves, we end up in sleep, which is a state of manolaya. So in order to avoid both the two forms of pramada, in order to avoid being carried away by our vishaya vasanas, in other words, being carried away by thought, and to avoid falling into sleep or into a state of mere quiescence, we need to hold on to self-attentiveness. It's all about clinging to self-attentiveness. The nature of the mind is to cling. If it's not clinging to something else, that if we want to avoid clinging to other things, we have to cling to ourselves. Otherwise, that state of quiescence, which is very peaceful, very calm, that is a subtle type of Vishaya. Shankara, I can't remember, in one of his Aparokshanubhuti, or one of those songs, one of the things he warns against in meditation, he said, guard against bliss. That is, it's very easy to lull oneself into a nice, pleasant state of quiescence, but that is a subtle Vishaya. So to avoid that, we need to cling to self-attentiveness. So though it is a relaxing of a way, but it's a relaxing as a result of that vigilance. And so long as, until ego is vanquished, the vasanas will be constantly rising. Bhagavan said, though vasanas rising countless numbers like ocean waves, they're always rising. They're always trying to take our attention away from ourselves. If we're not distracted by the gross Vishayas, we'll be distracted by these subtle Vishayas, like that pleasant state of calmness. That's a subtle Vishaya. So to avoid all forms of pramada, even the subtlest forms of pramada, we need to cling firmly to self-attentiveness. And that is a struggle, because the nature of the mind is to be always carried away by its Vishaya vasanas. So unless we're holding firmly onto ourselves, we will be carried away either by Vishaya vasanas or in a very subtle form into a state of quiescence. So either into a state of activity or into a state of quiescence. Both are to be avoided. We are to walk the razor's edge, to balance between the activity of the mind on one hand and the layer on the other hand.
We're going to move on to some questions on sleep and death. We have so many questions that it's actually...
Sleep is a short death, and temporary death, and death is a longer sleep.
Exactly. This is why I thought we'd try and do this together. Yeah. So this is actually two small questions, but I think we'll do one at a time, depending on how much time we have. And I thought that I'd ask the question on sleep and the question on death together, if that's helpful in any case. So the question is that in Nanyar, in paragraph 14, when Bhagavan says we experience sukha for a short time by returning to Brahman, is he talking about sleep or the happiness we experience when a desire is fulfilled or fear averted? And the second question is, because the self ever remains and doesn't go anywhere, what happens when a person dies? Is it death when the pranas leave the physical body along with the subtle body? Is the self there even in a dead body? Thank you.
Both. That is, what he says is, in truth, whenever our thoughts are fulfilled, in other words, whenever our wishes or desires or hopes are fulfilled, the mind, turning back to its proper place, in other words, to the heart, to its source, experiences only Atma-sukha. Likewise, at times of sleep, samadhi, and fainting, and when anything liked is obtained, and when destruction occurs to anything disliked, the mind becomes antamukham, inward-facing, and experiences only Atma-sukham. So any happiness we experience is Atma-sukham. The happiness is not coming from outside, it's coming from within ourselves. When a desire is fulfilled, for example, so long as the desire is present, it's agitating our mind. So our mind is in a restless state when our desire is not fulfilled. When the desire is fulfilled, when the desire is satisfied, there's a temporary subsidence of mind, partial subsidence of mind. And to the extent to which the mind subsides, to that extent it experiences the happiness that it is its own real nature. In other words, Atma-sukham. In this way, the mind wanders about incessantly, going outside, leaving oneself, and again turning back within. At the foot of a tree, the shade is pleasant. Outside, the heat of the sun is severe. A person who is wandering outside is cooled by going into the shade. After a short while, emerging outside, but being unable to withstand or bear the severity of the heat, he again comes to the foot of the tree. In this way, he remains, going from the shade into the sunshine and going back from the sunshine into the shade. A person who does this thus is an avivaki. But avivaki means someone who is lacking judgment or discernment or discrimination. But a viveki, someone who is able to discern things correctly, will not depart the shade. Likewise, the mind of the jnani will not depart, leaving Brahman. In other words, the mind of a jnani never rises and goes outwards. But the mind of the ajnani remains experiencing dukkha by roaming about in the world, and for a short while obtaining sukha, happiness, by returning to Brahman. So when Bhagavan says the mind of the jnani never leaves Brahman, that is because the mind of the jnani is destroyed. So the jnani is Brahman itself, but it's just a way of saying it. So the jnani never leaves Brahman. The jnani remains as Brahman. Whereas the ajnani is constantly going outside, experiencing misery, and when its desires are satisfied, or when it subsides in sleep or in death or samadhi or whatever it is, it temporarily subsides, at least to some extent, and to the extent it subsides, it experiences happiness. And that happiness is Brahman, because Brahman itself is that happiness. Brahman is our real nature. Brahman is what we actually are, and that is happiness. I hope that adequately, I think what Bhagavan says here, if we read it carefully, it is self-explanatory. But we need to think about it carefully to understand what he's saying here. But it seems to me to be quite self-explanatory.
And the second question is, because the self ever remains and doesn't go anywhere, what happens when a person dies? Is it death when the pranas leave the physical body along with the subtle body? Is the self there even in a dead body? Thank you.
The self is not in anything. Everything is in the self. The self here means our real nature. Our real nature is the sole reality underlying the appearance of everything. So there's no such thing as the self departing or anything departing from the self. That is just like the gold can never leave the ornament, and the ornament can never leave the gold. The gold is the underlying substance. The ornament is just a form. That form cannot exist without the gold. And so long that form exists, the gold is there. Likewise with the self, as people call it, which means our real nature. What we actually are is the substance, the vastu, the portal. That is the underlying. That is both the source and substance of ego and everything else. That is the source and substance of ego, and ego is the source and substance of everything else. So our real nature never goes anywhere. What happens at the time of death, in the 8th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan says, the prana is called the gross form of the mind. Until the time of death, the mind keeps the prana in the body, and at the moment the body dies, grasping it, that means grasping the prana, it goes. So what does he mean by the mind grasping the prana and going? The prana, that is, so long as the body is alive, the prana is manifest in the body as the breathing and all the other physiological functions. So how does the mind grasp and take away this prana? We need to understand more. We need to think about this more carefully to understand exactly what is happening. That is, in most, what is generally, the explanation that is generally given in Vedantic texts is that death is the death of the gross body. When the gross body dies, the subtle body is what transmigrates, what goes on to another life. But usually how people understand this, that is, the term sukshma sarira or subtle body usually refers to, that is, in terms of the five sheaths, the pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, and the jnanamaya kosha. In other words, the life, the mind, and the intellect are often referred to as the subtle body. But that is not the sense in which the term subtle body is used when it is said the subtle body goes on to another life. That is why, as earlier I was talking about verse 23 of, verse 24 of Uludunapadu, in which Bhagavan says that this I that rises at the extent of a body, between Satchit and the body, that is Chitjadagranti, Bandham, Chitjadagranti, the knot between, the knot that binds Chit and Jada, or the knot formed by the entanglement of Chit and Jada, Bandham, bondage, Jiva, the soul, Nupame, Nupame means subtle body. And he also says in, he says a similar thing in the end of the fourth paragraph of Nana. He says, the mind stands always by going after a stulum. That means something gross. What he means by mind here is ego. He's using the term mind ego in this sense. So ego always goes after something gross, namely it always grasps a body consisting of five sheaths as itself. Solitarily, it does not stand. And then he concludes by saying, the mind alone is described as sukshma sarira, the subtle body, and as jiva. As I say, here mind, he's using mind in the sense of ego. So when he says here that mind is the subtle body, and when he says in verse 24 of Uludunapadu that ego is the subtle body, he's obviously not saying, he's using the term subtle body here, not in the sense of three of the five sheaths, not in the sense of pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha. The reason he says this is, when it is said that the subtle body goes from, is what goes from one life to another, it is ego that goes from one life to another. What ego takes with it is only its vasanas. Its vasanas means its inclinations, its vishaya vasanas and all its vasanas. It takes them. If it has acquired sat vasana in this life, it will take the sat vasana also. So ego, what ego takes with it is its vasanas. The vasanas are collectively, or the vishaya vasanas are collectively what is called the karana sarira. That's the causal body. Why it is called the causal body is because the vasanas are the seeds that give rise to everything else. So they are the cause for the appearance of everything else. So what ego takes with it is only its vasanas, but its vasanas are the seeds that give rise to everything else. So its vasanas are what sprout as all the other four sheaths. So that when Bhagavan says that the mind takes the prana with it at the time of death, it's not the prana, it's not the physiological functions that it takes with it. It is the vasanas that give rise to those physiological functions. Why do we breathe? Why does our heart beat? Because of our vasanas, because we have desire to hold on to this body and to continue living in this body. All these physiological functions are happening because of our vasanas, which attach us to this body. So the the other four sheaves are all a sprouted form of the Vishaya Vasanas. In fact, the Vishaya Vasanas are the seeds that give rise to all Vishayas. Vishayas means objects or phenomena. So the entire universe is nothing but a projection of our own Vishaya Vasanas. That is, this is all a dream, and what is projected in this dream, sometimes Bhagavan used to explain the creation of the world in terms of using the analogy of a cinema projector. And he said the film in the cinema projector is the vasanas. So the light passing through those vasanas projects the picture on the screen. Likewise, the sprouting of these Vishaya vasanas that is, when Vishaya vasanas sprout, they appear as all these Vishayas. So but when Bhagavan said that the mind takes the prana with it, it takes the prana with it in seed form, in other words, as vasanas. So the reason Bhagavan says that the ego is the subtle body, both in this end of the fourth paragraph of Nana and in verse 24 of Uludunapadu, is when it is said that the subtle body goes from one life to another, it doesn't mean that the pranamaya kosha, manamaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha are going. It means ego is going. And ego takes with it the vasanas, which are the seeds that give rise to all these other sheaves. So it's a very subtle point we need to understand. This is why generally, with the death of the body, all our memories die along with the body. In some rare cases, it is possible to either by yogic techniques or by a certain hypnotic techniques, it is sometimes possible to recall past lives. But generally speaking, the memory, which is a part of the Manomaya kosha, it's dissolved at the time of death. So we don't normally have access to our memories from previous life, because all we are taking with us, ego, what we take with us is the vasanas. And but everything, it's not even, that is the way it's usually understood by people, is that when we leave this body, we leave behind this body as a corpse, and then we're floating around somewhere, God alone knows where, and then we enter into another body. This is a rather crude way of understanding it. Bhagavan gives us a far more subtle way of understanding this. That is, it's not that we're going from one body to another body. Ego is the dreamer. Each life is a dream. So when one dream comes to an end, the dream is that dream, and that dream identity is over. But ego, the dreamer, remains. So the next life is another dream. So we're not literally going from one body to another body. We, having projected one dream, when that dream comes to an end, we begin to project another dream. Either immediately or sooner or later, we begin to project another dream. So all our dreams are just a projection of our own Vishaya Vasanas. So what ego takes with it is only its Vishaya Vasanas. But those Vishaya Vasanas include the seed form of all the other four sheaves, including the pranamaya kosha. I hope that is a clear explanation.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
I was just wondering whether it may be a little confusing at times. If we say that there is only one ego, so to speak, that there is Eka Jiva, then if we say that the ego is taking something with it, we're just sort of really saying that there is just this one ego, but all sorts of things are happening. That when we say that the ego is taking something with it, we're talking about it from the individual's point of view. Would that be correct?
There's no contradiction in saying ego. There's only one ego, and ego takes things with it, because ego, though ego is one, it is the source of everything else. Everything else is comes into existence only when we rise as ego. But seeds from which everything else sprouts are the vasanas. So the ego takes with it everything in the form of its vasanas.